Well, international relations expert Professor John Stremlau is with the Department of International Relations at the Wits University, and he joins us now via Skype. A very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, U.S. officials released a video purportedly showing, the Iranian boat crew drawing up to the Kokuka courageous tanker just hours after the attack. And Iran says these are ridiculous and dangerous allegations by the United States. Now, these accusations and counter-accusations, are they not reminiscent of those attacks and counterattacks in the U.S.-Iran nuclear deal?
Well, there is the worry of escalation, and this impacts on Africa, and particularly South Africa, which imports a lot of oil from Iran and has heavy economic interest in Iran and would like to see Iran re-engage in the international community. That was, after all, the objective of the six-power agreement that was going to contain the nuclear threat that Iran posed to its neighbors and internationally. And it had the Chinese and the Russians, as well as the Europeans and the Americans, all on board. South Africa and others participated in the sanctions then. And then suddenly Donald Trump comes to power and abrogates that agreement after 2 years of waiting. He did it last year, with no plan at all evident in how he's thinking about this. So we're in a situation now where you have Donald Trump putting maximum pressure with no plan, and Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, no longer wanting to play along and wait for Trump to stumble, but actually saying, look, I'm going to put maximum resistance on. Now, who's behind these bombings or these mines on the ships, we don't really know.
Well, President Trump says Iran did it because he actually saw the boat. And on the other hand, Iran says President Trump actually saw a flying object. So I don't want to get into the merits of whether it was indeed a boat or the boat belonged to the Iranian crew. I mean, this tit-for-tat attacks, do you think that there will be an escalation of such tensions?
Well, that's the fear, and that's why the price of oil spiked and why insurance rates have gone up 10%, because that is a very heavily trafficked area. This was a Norwegian boat and a Japanese boat. I've also seen reports that are certainly credible that the Iranians helped the 23 crew members on each of those ships, I guess 66 crew members, to safety after the explosions. And we see that the United Nations Secretary General Guterres has called for restraint and condemned the bombings, but without, casting aspersions. There does seem to be a growing consensus that Iran may be behind it, but let's stop for a moment and think back to when Obama was president and we had the six-party agreement on nuclear nonproliferation. Iran was still active in the Gulf, very active in the Gulf, and that was its second track. And you deal with that in different political and diplomatic means. You've got to sort of engage, I believe, Iran. It's got within its own society deep opposition to the Ayatollahs and the hardliners who are in fact strengthened by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has his own divisions back in the U.S. where the American public doesn't want another war. I don't think Trump actually wants another war, but he wants to be the tough guy. And with no plan or no vision for where we're going, which we did have at least with the Obama two-track strategy.
But it seems another war is on the cards, or maybe am I jumping the gun? Because we've seen Germany calling for an inquiry, while China pledging its support for Iran, and the United Kingdom backing the United States on its stance that Iran was actually responsible for these attacks on the oil tankers. So, I mean, what's the implication of this?
Well, let's back up for a minute, because no one really would benefit from a war. Remember, the irony is that George W. Bush going into Iraq for nuclear weapons that did not exist. The CIA said there were nuclear weapons there, and they weren't. But that, in fact, removed Saddam Hussein, who contained Iranian expansionary interests. And so the United States is actually to blame for Iranian adventurism, if you're concerned about that. And there certainly are members of the Gulf community that are concerned about it. And the Europeans and the UN also want stability in the region. But you have to figure out a way to engage, because Iran is a complicated country. And what Donald Trump seems to believe, and Pompeo's statement seems to reiterate, is that they think the maximum sanctions pressures that they're putting on will bring down the regime. But in fact, it strengthens the hardliners. And so what it seems to me Trump is pursuing is a totally counterproductive policy, but one that could lead to the risks that you suggest for escalation and conflict. I just can't see where it would lead, though, because the U.S. is not going to invade, and Donald Trump wants to run for re-election and doesn't want to have his campaign complicated by being mired in a conflict that really has no popularity among the American people that I can see from all the polling attitudes.
Indeed, Professor, and I'm actually reading into reports that the United States moves were aimed at forcing Iran to negotiate a new deal that would also address its ballistic missiles program as well as support for armed groups in the region. Are you also of the same view?
Well, Donald Trump takes a very zero-sum approach to negotiations, born of his real estate business, which wasn't all that successful, we now know, in New York, and thinks purely zero-sum, not positive sum, not compromise, not negotiations, not diplomacy, and certainly not complicated. I mean, you have this combination of ignorance and incompetence and impulsiveness, and that is not a recipe for moving forward on what is a very difficult issue. I'm not making excuses for Iran. Far be it. I think that they would benefit greatly if the Green Movement, this is the 10th anniversary of the Green Movement in Iran. Remember this outpouring of sympathy for overthrowing the leader in 2009, Abidjan. And what happened was that they were repressed, but they're still there. I mean, you've got 10 million young people, highly educated in Iran, who want change, who want democracy. Well, it shouldn't be for outsiders to decide. It should be for the Iranian people to decide. But pushing them in a corner, as Trump is doing, is counterproductive, in my view.
All right, Professor, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. That was Professor John Stremlau. He's an international relations expert with the University of the Witwatersrand. This is The Globe on SABC News. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back.